get there. The first obvious one is horror. And I'd like to say that I think the horror genre, this is for the ones that are on the decline, I think the horror genre always sucked. I don't think it was ever good. I think it's the thinnest genre that's out there. And people will or won't disagree, but I'd also argue that the Japanese horror kind of sucks in real life. I used to have
interesting.
I used to have Screambox, which is a $2 a month service that only carries horror movies. And let's be honest, everybody got Screambox so they could watch Terrifier 2, and then as soon as they saw it, they unsubscribed. But because I'm a huge horror fan, and I wanted to be able to watch more horror shows. Well, it turns out that Screambox is mostly like what are they called? D-list movies, or even worse, right? And Screambox had
DVD type stuff.
Just really low budget, like just terrible fucking movies. Screambox had a whole section just for Japan. And I would look up the most famous Japanese horror movies, and I'd see which ones were on Screambox, and so I'd watch them. The Ring and all that, the basic ones. And they're just terrible. It's some of the most low budget junk you've ever seen. I mean, and that isn't to say that horror movies can't be good if they're out of a low budget. Terrifier 1 they made for $35,000. That was a hit. Paranormal Activity made like $200 million or something ridiculous, and it only cost them $15,000 to make that movie. It just seems to me that Japanese horror in general is a big fail. So you guys may or may not agree, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest horror fan personally, but I do, think that, I mean, I know people that are big horror fans, and there is an ardent love of Japanese horror. Like that is a genre of horror that is, as far as from what I've seen, pretty beloved, and maybe has fallen off in recent years, but certainly there are some staples. Movies that have come out of Japan that have been remade for American Western audiences that are absolutely legendary.
There are a few, but if you go on like Netflix, and I don't want to belabor this too much because it would just go long, but if you go on Netflix or something and you start watching the horror movies that are coming out now, a lot of them are foreign. A lot of the really savage, like fucked up movies are foreign, right? And and I'll tell you right now, none of them are Japanese. They're Indonesian, they're Korean, they're French. They're Norwegian,
right?
But there are no Japanese ones, or they're Chinese. There were some really good Chinese ones that came out recently, but and I think that horror is more of a theme in anime instead of the actual focus. I think Mason and we talked about that earlier with Dorohedoro, and that's
it's an aesthetic. They put on the horror hat and have spooky elements, but it's not really frightening. And I feel like part of me thinks that's in fact your brain knows, and it's harder to trick because there's more of a gap between seeing, live action horror and believing that could happen to me, and seeing our cartoon killer clown and being like, yeah, it's a killer clown, but it's also a cartoon. And you can find gore in anime, shows like Shigeru. You can find suspense with masterpieces like Perfect Blue, like Orb, an anime from this season, has scenes of like people ripping off fingernails, and you feel uneasy. Haibane Renmei has like the wing scene like popping out of the girl's back, and you feel upset by it, but it's not really
makes me hungry.
Horrifying. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I could go for some Buffalo Wild Wings. No, but like it doesn't make you horrified and keep you up in the same way. Not saying that people aren't terrified of it, but it's just not on the same level that a live action thing can produce. And anime is never really excelled, so I don't feel like it's failing at horror, because I can't be like, oh, back in the 80s Japanese horror anime were phenomenal. It's like it's always been weird and dark, but it's never been a genre that the anime has excelled at, unfortunately.
All right, so I'm going to prove my point here with this. So, and my point is that, again, that the anime, that the Japanese horror genre is bad. So the last 5 years, I wrote down, I already went on my anime list. I looked up all the horror shows the last 5 years, and I marked down the ones that had good reviews or had a lot of people that watched them. We'll start with Uzumaki. Uzumaki already has shitty reviews on my anime list. It's a 6.6.
And it's getting worse.
I was told that like the first episode looks good, and then it looks like ass after that. Like it's just not gonna.
Next week on the AAA podcast, we're talking about all of Uzumaki. So if you want to watch it and join in on the fun, we're talking about it next week. So Anyway, yes, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, and there's a few others here that I'm going to mention. The next one on the list is Zom 100, and the person that submitted the topic already noted that was a letdown. Zom 100 is not horror. It is comedy, clearly. It's clearly comedy. If you think it isn't, you're wrong. It just is. Have you seen Zom 100, Cosmo?
I have not. No.
All right, it's basically just a silly show where people run around and they're running from zombies, but it's not really horror.
The zombies are literally just representing, life sucks sometimes, so make the most of it, have a positive attitude, get the most out of life. It's more of an uplifting message than a, oh God, we're gonna die type of zombie invasion.
Gotcha. Any relation to Mob Psycho 100? No.
Unfortunately.
There are a few that are good that I would note here. This one, Dark Gathering, we never watched it, but it has a fair amount of people who did watch it. It has almost an 8, so so I'll give you that.
It was all right, but it wasn't horrifying.
Here's the Zom 100. Half the planet watched this, but it's not horror. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. This Meiruko-chan, a lot of people watched it. Mediocre review. I'm just gonna go out on a limb, and I haven't seen this, but I'm just gonna say that this isn't horror either. I watched the trailers yesterday, and not a single element of horror exists anywhere in the trailers. And then at the end of it, it describes itself as a comedy at the end of the trailer. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is not a comedy. This is not horror either. It's probably a comedy with schoolgirls, and then there's like a spooky ghost, and it's not really horror. Then there's this other show, Tenku Shinpon, which I don't know shit about, but it has a bad review. But I would also say it doesn't seem like very much horror from what I saw. And then the last one is Dorohei Doro, and this is not horror either. So I mean, I'm borderline ready to say that the only good horror show that's come out in the last 5 years is Dark Gathering. If you guys can think of another one, I'll hear it, but yeah, I have no evidence as to the contrary.
I mean, are you arguing for horror as a aesthetic or horror as a actual genre? Because I would argue there's not really any as a genre where it excels and does a good job of it. There are just shows that have good elements of horror. Like Made in Abyss has some scary moments, but it's not like a horror anime. Like there's tons of shows that, like I said, wear the aesthetic well, but don't execute on frightening you. Promised Neverland has a great kind of horror vibe at the beginning, and then it kind of fades out.
Yeah, I mean that definitely starts off, I think, pretty strongly horror, at least in that
it's
first season.
Suspenseful, but is it? Are you closing your laptop after watching episode 1 of Promised Neverland and being like, "Ooh, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight"?
No, I guess not.
You're like, "Oh, those kids are going to not have a good day tomorrow," but like I'm going to be fine.
Chat says Chat said another. That show's too old. We're talking about like recent things. That show's like 10 years old or even older now.
Yeah, I mean, you could bring up Higurashi, like that has
too old.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's
cheeky, but like they're
20 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
So like to me, I feel horror and anime is how I feel about sports and anime a lot nowadays. Where the sports is like, oh, these people they play volleyball, but like 96% of the show is them sitting around and like eating and talking. Like it's not really about sports.
No, I will say, Brandon, if you want some zombie apocalypse type shows, Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress is kind of adjacent.
It is.
I think there's a Korean movie called Seoul Station, which is probably pretty accurate as well. So check them out. But
it's a cool show. It's pretty cool. Yeah. I like it.
Normally, if you're getting zombies nowadays, you're getting like Zombieland Saga, or just using zombies in a new form more than the traditional. Ooh, they're killing everyone. So, oh well.
Anything else on horror? Do we agree?
I feel like it's pretty undeniable that it is on a decline for sure. Right. I think the next one that you have listed here, that's the first one that popped into my mind. If you want to get into that one.
So the mecha genre. Mecha used to be so popular that other countries would rip it off and make shows like Robotech. And put it on TV. Because Mecha was so massive, but it's really been in decline for about 20 years, I'd say, from its peak. Probably peaked in like the 80s and 90s. I got a lot of information from an article for this off of Reddit, and some guy like said he wrote his thesis on this exact topic and like just launched into it.
Jeez.
So I would actually argue against this.
You would argue that Mecha is not in the decline.
So I would say that if your point is that Mecha is not as popular as it once was, I would 100% agree. Mecha used to be a top 5 genre of anime. It used to be the tour de force. You're getting
Yeah.
all the action figures because it's easier to sell stuff of these little mechanoid Gundams. And really, back in the 80s, 90s, like big budget CG Hollywood stuff couldn't do what it does nowadays. So really, anime was the best place to see these cool robots do their thing. And I feel like that's obviously Mecha was popular and blooming. But really, if you look at the numbers, in a sense, almost as much Mecha is coming out today as it was decades ago. Like just numerically, you're still getting 20 or so Mecha shows a year. The problem is they're just being overshadowed by all the other genres that it's just getting lost in the sauce, and what you are getting
Well,
isn't the force that it once was. So you're still getting the Mecha you always wanted. It's just not the premiere of anime, and it's just not as good in a lot of sense. So it's just kind of existing but not thriving like it once was.
So the thing that popped into my mind, which was like the first genre that I thought of, was in the mecha realm, which was like more militaristic, real robot kind of shows. And I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I do feel like we haven't gotten a lot of that. Like a lot of the mecha that we get nowadays is more what do they call it? Not the real robot, but the other one. I forget.
Super robot.
Yeah, super robot. But at least that's what anecdotally what I've seen myself. But if you have metrics to indicate that that's wrong, that's great. I would be willing to hear that.
Well, so I'd like to get into some argument here, but I'm going to argue that there's not nearly as much mecha nowadays, and particularly not noteworthy mecha. And I have a whole article here. Like, listen, I just want to give this guy credit.
Sure.
I'm going to put it on the screen here. This was a pretty good read. This article this guy wrote it's on Quora. This Irwin guy said his 2001 graduate's thesis was on anime, and he has written a massive article on here that's quite long, and it has a lot of information about why this is happening, and we'll get into that because I wrote down some of the bullet points, but let's just go through this real quick. In 1998, 1999, which is the period I always like to go to, there were 25 shows that were mecha, and this is TV series, right? 9 or 10 of them were noteworthy. Those were The Big O, Infinite Revias, which is a super cool anime that no one ever talks about, Blue Gender, Steel Angel Kurumi, Cat Girl Nuku Nuku, Zoids, which I love Zoids.
Zoids, yes.
Turn A Gundam, AD Police, Bubblegum Crisis, and Beast Wars. Those all came out during the 2-year period. And I'd argue that in the last 2 years, there's really only 2, maybe 1 show at all that's come out. And I'm going to go through them. And then, and then I'd love if you guys argue with me because I think it makes good content.
Sure.
These are, the first one is this show called Sensuality Noir, which I didn't watch, so I don't know shit about it. Doesn't have a great review, but it is mecha. So I watched the trailer. It's mostly robots blowing shit up and stuff like that. Then there was another show called Brave Bang Bravern, which I haven't seen. Yeah, Bravern, which I haven't seen either. But like nobody watched this. And then there was the Witch of Mercury anime that came out. This is from 2024, by the way. Witch of Mercury. Actually, that was last year. This year, Gundam Requiem came out, which is bad, and I'm sure we're going to fail it in a couple weeks. Then there were 2 kids shows. And then there was Grendizer U and Shinkalion, which were both apparently bad, and no one watched them. So from 2024, really you've got like 2 or 3, then they were mostly bad. Then in 2023, you had even fewer. You had 7 kids shows from 2023, and I mean like shows that are obviously meant for like 6-year-olds. Like it'd be like Beyblade or something like that. You had the first season of Sensuality Noir, the Gundam Witch of Mercury show. Then there was a show about a vermin extermination company, which is not even really mecha. And then they considered 2 Fully Cooley shows mecha. And I watched the trailers, and there's not a single robot featured in either of the trailers. So from 2023, I'd say really you just have the Gundam Witch of Mercury, Sin Duality Noir, and that's it. And I don't think anybody really watched the second
None.
one.
What about Gridman? What about Pluto? What about Fafnir? What about the new Code Geass? What about Data Live? What about Gundam Seed movie? What about the Zega Pain movie?
We're not.
All in
I'm not looking at movies. When did Fafnir come out?
I don't know, probably 2023.
How do you even spell Fafnir?
Fafner. I don't know. I haven't. I haven't seen it.
You're like, I'm not watching that crap.
I don't know. I feel like it came out. When did it come out? Feel like I mean it's been around for forever. But I
There's
felt like there was a movie or something.
There's Sokyu no Fafnir Dead Aggressor. It came out in 2004. Sokyu no Fafnir.
Yeah,
Dead
I mean it's been
Aggressor,
around for like 2 decades.
Season 2
It's
came
just
out
some lingering.
came out in 2025. I'm just
or coming out in 2025.
yeah, or not 2025, 2015. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
So I was only looking up TV shows from the last 2 years, and there
okay.
really aren't any. So
Yeah, I mean there's more movies and stuff, but like they exist, but also you can't bring up like Cat Girl Nuku Nuku and be like, oh, what a force of mecha when it has like a. No one has watched Nuku Nuku besides you, Mitz. I'm sorry to say.
How many people have watched Kakro Nuku Nuku? Do you think?
I think 7 in the world,
Including you.
Yeah, I'll count Mitch for 2 of them.
I'm kind of
I
curious
don't know.
about
It's
that.
like It's hard to say like, oh, you can't count these shows as mecha because they suck. But also, here's a show from the '90s that I like that's objectively sucks.
Well,
so,
don't
like,
well,
we
don't
can count it there.
Okay, well, don't call out Kakro Nuku Nuku and as a way to discount Big O, Infinite Revice, Blue Gender, Zoids, Gundam, 80 Police, Bogum Crisis, and Beast Wars. I mean that's a list of shows that
Is
is a list.
when it was at its peak. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying mecha still exists. Yeah, sure, maybe it's on life support, and I'm not arguing it's not as popular, but mecha fans are desperate. They'll take anything these days.
Well, that's my point. Like I don't think that most of these shows their mecha seems to have been reduced. If you go on any list or whatever and filter it down to mecha and look at the last 2 years, it's a bunch of kiddie stuff.
Yeah.
I just think mecha's been reduced to a kiddie genre. It's meant for kids now. It's just a kids thing.
I mean, which makes sense, right? It's like they want to sell the toys and and kids are going to buy that up. And I mean, certainly, of course, there is an adult art audience for like Gunpla and stuff like that. But largely, it is kid driven and kid focused, and so it would make sense that a lot of the shows would be aimed at them.
Chat says Pluto. I don't think Pluto's a mecha show.
I mean, we're getting into the weeds of what is a Pluto.
Yeah, that's mostly humanoids and humanoid. I mean, if Pluto's in a mecha show, so is Ghost in the Shell, because they're just cyborgs walking around.
They're them robots. But
Yeah.
I mean, even going back to like the retro revival, like SSSS Gridman, like that's bringing back a tokusatsu show from the '90s, fresh coat of paint, fresh anime aesthetic, and coming out of the gate and really doing a good job. Like that show looks awesome, feels great. If you're that into that kind of thing, Braverin is kind of in that similar camp as well.
Well, like I said,
they're making stuff, but it's just not the premiere. You're not getting the best of the best anime studios and people handcrafting these meticulously hand detailed cockpits, which is awesome. I wish we could go back there. I really do, but it's just not where we're at these days.
I guess I didn't lay the rules out clear enough at the beginning, but the Gridman show is way too old. That's 6 years old. Time flies.
But it's still coming out. Do we take credit for shows that started a couple years ago that are still existing? Like the movies are still coming out.
Nah, see, I didn't count them. I didn't go
Okay.
into It's just too long of a list. Anyway.